Hey everyone. So I think the first point is, Michael Cade, senior technologist at Veeam Software. I think there's a couple of questions that I'm going to get asked the same from the last session. So I want to cover some of those here as well up front. Nathan asked some really good questions around when to use the central VBR UI and when to use like the in particular point solutions. Maybe that's AWS, Azure, and GKE or GCP. Sorry. I think the fundamentals there are there's obviously a choice there, but we've built it so that the backup admin that has to look after all of those solutions can have a central location to manage those. And then that gives you the functionality to be able to send those backups to different locations, whether it be S3 compatible because you've brought on-premises S3 storage, or whether it is because you want to go from AWS to Azure. I think the point that Nathan made is a good point, and we should take it back to product management around, I want to be able to take my AWS backups and I want to be able to store them in a different S3 location, such as like S3 compatible maybe, or potentially off to a different object storage location, such as Azure. So I think as well, there are a lot of interfaces. We have a lot. You saw Anthony also show console and VBO, and we do have that. I think the fundamental there is that we're building up a lot of these new products to fit a point solution that can then be centrally managed. And I think it's an evolving, like it's an evolution of what we're doing here. Like we're trying to get to that. We're trying to load the truck as we're going down the motorway, right? We want the features and functionality for our customers that we're speaking to on a daily basis. But then we're also trying to get that API driven approach where VBR becomes a full-blown a web interface or a console for everything. And I think it's either us waiting 5 years for that to happen, or we load the truck as we go. Obviously, if we were going to build Veeam today, like Veeam is a 15-year-old company, got hundreds of thousands of customers. It's a very different story for a startup today. You go and build it very differently.
So I'll give you an opportunity here because you're kind of in a different area right now because you discussed how you're loading the truck as it's going down the motorway, and I appreciate you discussing that. But you're going to go into cloud native, I believe, if I'm following you on Twitter and all those good things. So can you maybe just quickly, you probably will do that in your discussion, discuss basically what the audience is for what you're going to show?
Yeah, absolutely. So and I was going to get to, well, Nathan, you're going to see another interface right now. So that's kind of why I was leading in with that question, because you're going to see yet another interface. But I think exactly to your point is that the interface that you're going to see from a K10 perspective, this one in front of us, light mode included if you wish, is very much focused at the cloud native application, the Kubernetes administrator, the platform operator. However, we know that the evolution of that, whatever that admin looks like, whatever that platform ops, DevOps engineer looks like, whoever's looking after the data management aspect of Kubernetes and applications within that and stateful workloads within that, is probably going to be a lot of the virtualization and physical space that we've all been a part of, or at least myself, and I know Nathan, yourself, and some of the others around the delegate table are in that space right now. So I'm not saying that this is a completely different audience, but when it comes to Kubernetes administrators, developers even, they're generally they're looking at protecting their data. Now I'm showing a UI. Now I've just completely wiped out a lot of the developers or DevOps engineers that want to automate the tasks. I've said in a previous session around everything that you see from a UI perspective here, and all of the backup actions and restore actions that we have within Kasten K10 is also exposed via a Kubernetes API as well. So if you want to automate that process, then we can do that as well. But yeah, I think that is a completely valid point. The one thing I would say, and that's what I'm going to really talk about, is how this ties into the VBR story today, and then where it goes after that. And you can probably see where it goes from what AZ and what David spoke about. But everything that we do within K10 leaves breadcrumbs around what the API call would be. So if I was to go into the policies, obviously a policy is is us protecting a workload based on some sort of label tag or a point object that we have within our environment. If I go into here, you'll see the YAML is given to us, so we can go and find that. If I was to go kubectl get config, and we can add the other aspect to that. If there's more than one config API within our system or policy, we can go and look up that policy and see that as an API, as a YAML call within K10 as well. There's other areas around that, and we can get the export. So YAML again is going to give us what I just showed, but with some more information. So hopefully that kind of tees up to where we were just talking about the other products all tying into one central location. So what we've recently done, and I was going to talk about Kasten K10 4.5 that was released last week. And with that, where 11A, and I mentioned at the beginning of one of the sessions, was around 11A gave us the ability to leverage or be Kasten ready, as it were. So we can leverage VBR repositories, so backup repositories within backup repositories within Veeam Backup Replication as a target for our persistent volumes within Kubernetes. Now, there's lots of caveats around that, and I won't get into the FAQs around what platforms are actually supported from day one when we actually release this from a K10 perspective. But remember that, so Veeam Backup Replication 11A has been released, so that's Kasten ready. Kasten K10 releases on a 2-week cadence, so 2-week sprints, and we've already dropped 4.5. In fact, we're 4.51 now. So expect, I would say, by the end of November to have this functionality that I'm about to show, but bear in mind that this at the moment is going through QA. So if you see TBDs, then bear with us. That's obviously part of the QA process. The build that I've got is a daily build that we're working towards. But basically, if you haven't seen K10, you saw the front page. Basically, we're going to dynamically discover our applications, our namespaces within our Kubernetes cluster. We've got our policies, which I'll run through shortly as well. And then we've got usage and reports. Now, those familiar with Kasten K10 would have seen this as a data card before. Now, if I go into here, there's not much going on. It's simply a small demo environment. But it used to be data, and it gave us information about the backups, what object storage is being used, and what live storage. So it gives you visibility or observability into what storage are we actually using. So a good place to come and start understanding what that data change looks like, or what my backups are taking up and why, or why was there a spike in that. So we can start to see, I've got 2 snapshots, and then I've got, again, bear in mind it's a beta, so it's not showing what I'm sending off to VBR, but it will give you that information as to, okay, what does my backup footprint look like?
So when you say storage that's being used, is that storage on the cluster? And does it also show you the storage off the cluster? I'm just curious what the storage setup looks like on the back end.
Yeah. So backups in K10, and we won't get into too much of a deep dive on this. Backups are referred to as our snapshots within K10, and exports are what we export out into object storage. So this is kind of the off cluster or on cluster for backups. That's your snapshot, really fast recovery points. Object storage, or expect this to see target storage or backup location or export. We need to make common the naming convention that we use between Kasten K10 and Veeam. Bear that in mind as well. But then also from a live on cluster. So my workload is actually taking up 1.5 gig of storage within the actual cluster. So I have persistent volumes that are taking up that much space. And you can see here that I have 3 persistent volume claims. But what this will also do is, if you've got a config map, and this is another enhancement, but if you've got a config map that allows us to pull in data from an AWS RDS point of view, from a storage point of view, that will also be listed here. So this gives you your production storage, and these give you your backend or your backup storage footprints. So that's already in the product. That data usage down is already in there. What we introduced in 4.5, hopefully, Ned, did that help?
Yeah, that was perfect. I have plenty more questions, but
yeah.
You go ahead for now, and I'll interrupt you later.
So from a 4.5 point of view, we added, or a lot of our customers wanted the capability of being able to have these scheduled reports. So instead of coming into the UI, again, we wanted some way of being able to get a snapshot of what that storage looks like. So you can see here, I've ran one, and these come up as a policy. Now, another thing to add here is that these are all from an API. So I don't have to come in here and get this information. I can actually go to usage and report. In fact, if I go to policies, and I jump into here, I can get the YAML for that. And now I can go and find that information via the API. If I had another tool set that wanted to gain that information and visualize it myself, I could go and do that. But what a big part of 4.5 was extending, I don't know if that's right, extending the extensibility of K10, improving the extensibility of K10 and what it can do. Because another feature that was added, another integration from an ecosystem point of view, was we already shipped K10 with Prometheus, our own version of Prometheus. I mean, you can leverage a pre-existing Prometheus option as well, and that's fine. But then also we didn't have the visualization. So what we also added, and this is not going to be much fun because of the level of data that I've got, but hopefully it gives you an idea of what it looks like, is we've also implemented our own Grafana implementation. Again, if you've got your own, bring your own Grafana type thing, you can expose this data out into that as well using our Helm chart values. But you can get an idea of, okay, from one UI, we get to now see a lot more of that information around what's going on from a K10 point of view, how many exports have happened, how many backups are happening, what restore wise, and just some figures and visualization of what's actually going on. So that's another 4.5 area. The thing that another area that we enhanced or brought in was the integration with VBR. So you see here that I've added a location profile of VBR. And if I go to new profile, you'll see, so from a K10 point of view, we can export that data, any of that data from within the cluster, but also think about anything that's leveraging outside data services as well, such as AWS RDS. If it's part of the whole application using config maps and providing that we have the access rights and the blueprint that allows us to do that, then we can protect everything under that whole application. Then we can go and save that or store that data, export that data out into any of these cloud storage providers. Well, again, we might need to look at the naming here, because it started off as, okay, you can go to GCS, you can go to Amazon S3, you can go to Azure blob storage, you can go to S3 compatible. More recently was NFS file store. So if you've got a local NFS server, you could go to that. But then even more recently, again, not even GA yet, is the ability to go off to a Veeam backup server. And again, this is leveraging APIs that are being exposed via Veeam backup replication. We give it our backup server. Our API port is by default, but obviously that can be changed if need be. We give it our repository, our username and password. And then what happens is we've got, if we jump over to VBR, again, much like what you've seen from a demo perspective from AZ, but I've only got K10 stuff in here, is that we've got our K10 environments. In fact, if I go platform, you'll see Kasten there as that platform. Then when we go into here, where this gets quite interesting is we can actually export the contents of this out as virtual disks. So as those first class disks, and be able to restore them into a vSphere Tanzu environment or another Kubernetes environment using those disks. So it's the start of a journey around how we bring in that visibility in one central location. If you're a developer and you're wanting to look after your MySQL database in a cloud native fashion, and you've not got any vSphere, you've never even heard of Veeam before, that's fine. We've got you covered there with just K10. And then but if you are part of a backup admin team that are looking after virtualization, cloud, Kubernetes, and all your like SaaS-based offerings as well, then this might be the right fit for that UI. So that gives you the ability to start having a bit more visibility into what's happening in the K10 dashboard. Now, I will say as well is that obviously this is a progression again, like the integration points don't stop at this. We want to be able to manage more. And those that have followed Veeam, you know what platform services would be, and that's the ability to manage more from within VBR, a bit like what you saw from a like from all of the Veeam backup for cloud products. You can actually manage them from within VBR. Now, from a K10 perspective, we can only manage everything locally. From a K10 point of view, we can only manage it from a K10 dashboard. So the next iteration will enhance that even further. I'm not going to run through a restore because it just takes time, and I imagine there's quite a few more questions to rattle off.
I don't know if you mentioned already, but can you protect multiple clusters, or at least track multiple clusters using this dashboard view you're showing now?
Good question. So from a K10 architecture point of view, K10 is deployed into each and every Kubernetes cluster. So if you've got dev and test, if you've got US East, US West, you would deploy K10 into each one.
Okay.
Now, what we have, though, is the ability to offer disaster recovery. So the catalog is then exposed and sent to various different locations for that. But also, we have a multi-cluster tool. So multi-cluster gives us the ability to manage everything under one UI.
Okay. Is that the same UI as this, or is that?
Yes.
Okay. It's not
basically, Ned, what you have up here is multi-cluster and then a list of all the clusters that you have available to you.
Mm-hmm.
I have done some other videos and I'll try and share them afterwards as well, but it looks and feels the same. But the difference is that we can set global policies at that point. So if you've got gold, silver, bronze type workloads, that's kind of a simple profiling. But if you've got that, then we can create a global profile that only gets MySQL and it protects it based on this global policy in all of the locations. So a very simplified look to that. In fact, when Kasten, I think, when we presented last time, maybe we touched on multi-cluster, maybe not. If not, I've got resources that say about that as well.
Can you also copy snapshots from one cluster to another? Say I've got, this is my production cluster, something went weird. I want to take a snapshot of that, move it into a testing cluster to see what happened. Can I do that pretty easily?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the concept of an import policy as well. So I've said about create policy, and I've generally always spoken about this being a backup. But what we have is the ability to do an import policy, which is importing from any object storage, providing you've got this config data like this. There's a secret basically that you need to provide so that you can grab hold of that data and then you can restore that. So this is what we use for disaster recovery as well. So we can have a scheduled policy that is going on an hourly basis or on a change or based on something that is importing that into a different cluster as well.
For that restore on the dev cluster or whatever, can you create a mapping for some of the things that might not exist? Like it's a different storage class name in your dev cluster or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if this one will have it, but yeah. So we have something called transformations. So being able to apply transforms to restored. And actually, yeah, storage class is a great one because we use that actually as an example that you can run through. But basically any resource that you have on the front end, we can change and manipulate. Because perfect example, if you're going from EKS to GKE, then the storage class is going to be different, right? You're going to be, so we want to be able to make that as seamless as possible. This stuff is complex enough. Let's make it easy for you to make those changes. So yeah, that's all part of that import policy.
So you're talking about with the multiple K10 deployment model for as you go to different regions, different workloads. With that kind of in mind, and for enterprise that consume other parts of the Veeam ecosphere, is there capability to build this into that VSPC, either for enterprises that want to use it for a single use visibility or for service providers?
So the Kasten K10 dashboard, the multi-cluster dashboard, that can be used. Mm-hmm. If you're talking about the whole wider VCSP, that's definitely a roadmap discussion to have later on. But yeah, it's definitely not locked away from service providers. Anthony's done some really good talks around K10 there.
With Kasten now, looking to integrate into VBR, they've got a managed VBR. Is there visibility through that? You see what I'm saying?
So there are, I can't remember off the top of my head what the additional backup logic looks like, but we should be able to, like, for example, if you've got your Kubernetes data, you've got MySQL database, mission critical, and you're sending it to a Veeam backup repository, and then you want to push that to tape, for example, then that should be possible, unless I've missed something in the QO notes. But so bear that in mind from a service provider point of view, you should be able to throw that into a different repository. But yeah, I would wait for the release notes and I would wait for the FAQs. I might have just given away information. I might no longer work for them. So, but hopefully not. And hopefully that's part of it is part of the roadmap if it's not imminent.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Trying to get me fired.
Hey, Michael, Larry Smith. I may have missed this and I apologize if I did, and I'm pretty sure you can do this. From a backup perspective, do I have the ability to go ahead and select a namespace and back up everything within that namespace as well as restore over? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a couple of ways in which you can define what we will actually want to protect. So we could do it on a whole namespace or an application on that front panel that I showed here. I can go in here. These are ultimately namespaces. If I went down into kubectl get namespaces, all of these would appear, and we could just go, okay, create a policy, and it would grab everything within that. Now, we could also get a bit more creative from a policy point of view, and we can start doing by labels. So if you've got multiple namespaces that consist of MySQL or Postgres or they're mission critical gold type apps, we could add them in here and as a label called gold. Or you can say no, and there's also cluster scoped resources as well that we can capture.
That's pretty cool. So it doesn't matter what namespace I'm in, as long as the app or the app labels or anything like that are defined, I can capture on that. That's pretty slick.
Yeah, exactly that. So there's a few places that you can create that policy as well. So if I just go into policies, obviously this is now blank, and we can go in here and we can go by name, and we can actually just drop down. So if you've got 1,000 namespaces, obviously that's going to be a bit of a pain from a UI perspective, and you're probably wanting to use the CLI for that or the API for that. So, but we can. So there's various ways in which you can create that. Yeah, either via labels or by name.
Awesome, thank you.
Hey, Michael. When we're trying to get Kasten up and running, what prereqs does it require, or could I just run a simple Helm command to install it?
Yeah, so that was going to be part of the next bit that I was going to share, but I've been working on, so yes, fundamentally it's a Helm chart deployment, but we're also now in something called Arcade, ARKADE, which is basically a Kubernetes application marketplace. So you could just go Arcade, install K10 or whatever the command is that was in my slides. I'll make sure we share them. But what we're trying to do is make it simpler to install. I mean, Helm is pretty simple by any stretch, but also widen how people can get it installed as well. So yeah, it's a Helm chart by the fundamentals as to how it's installed.
In terms of resource types that you can protect, obviously all the standards, config map, persistent volumes, that kind of stuff. Do you also support protecting custom resources that are part of an application?
Yeah, exactly that. So if we go into applications here, we can also see cluster scope resources. So we can create a policy based on them. I don't have any in my environment, but we could just create a cluster based on that. If we go into one of those policies and we go down to edit, maybe my application absolutely requires on those cluster-wide resources. In fact, a lot of them do. So we have the ability down here to snapshot cluster scoped resources as well. And we can filter them as well based on whatever you need for that application. Basically, if you think about, we want to capture the whole application. And if that application has constructs that live outside, maybe as a cluster shared resource, or even further from an AWS RDS point of view, that's how we capture those.
Well, I was more thinking about custom resource types. Like if I have an API, specialized API gateway that has resource types that are defined in CRDs, is it going to see those and grab them if they have the proper label?
Yeah, the best way to visualize that, obviously I don't have what you're alluding to from an application point of view, but if we go into here, if you were to deploy it in your cluster, you could go here and go details, and it gives us that long list of all the different config files that we have, the artifacts within that. So I don't have anything with the CRD in this demo lab, but you can see config maps, for example, and the like. So whatever and I'd be interested as to what your idea is, because I can hear something moving as well. That'd be cool to back this up. I'd be interested to work with you on that and see if we can.
Just real quick, Terraform. You have all the modules for Terraform, so I can stamp out policies and things like that, or?
So I've been playing with Terraform, obviously Larry and Ned actually, and anyone else, HashiCorp ambassadors. So I've been looking at that from this perspective. We don't have a Terraform provider. The only thing that we can leverage, though, that I'll shout out is the Helm provider, which basically is just another way of deploying K10, right? It's still Helm, but it allows us to automate the implementation of Kasten. I think the important thing is that from a Veeam perspective, we have various different options to protect the workloads, and they're all moving. We have all of the moving parts to help our customers protect that data. I think and they're all moving at the pace that they possibly can from a product management point of view.